Welcome to Wednesday. Welcome to Uncovered. I'm Anthony Davis. He's Ron Filipkowski. And together we uncover the MAGA propaganda that is not covered by the corporate media. Ron, you're looking very bright today, like you've caught the sun or something.
Bright lights.
Bright lights, yes. Well, welcome to show business. So we've got lots to talk about today. Donald Trump appears to be becoming more unhinged as his poll rating falls, as the days tick down. Where are we now? 44 days before the election. We've got early voting that has started, which means, well, that's his excuse for not wanting to do another debate. And meanwhile, the rhetoric, the Trump rhetoric is ramping up. The anger, the negativity towards immigrants. They're coming from Asia. They're coming from Africa. I mean, it's like, I can't really handle it. The good news, though, is that Jack Smith, the special counsel, has presented a dossier, to coin a phrase, of 180 pages worth of evidence around Donald Trump's election subversion. Tell us about this to start with, Ron.
Just when we think, the court system wasn't going to help us out at all, here we go. So when the if you remember, when the Supreme Court issued their immunity decision, a lot of people were very upset. And I talked about the silver lining in the dark cloud of that decision, which was a terrible decision. But the silver lining, what I said was, well, this is going to require Jack Smith to make pretrial filings now, on key pieces of evidence that he has against Trump that have never been released to the public, because he's going to have to get rulings from Judge Chutkan on whether immunity applies, because the Supreme Court said that she had to rule on each individual piece of evidence to see whether it fits into one of their three categories of immunity under their test.
Right.
So what I said is, well, what that means is that Jack Smith is going to have to publicly file what those evidence things are, and hopefully he will do that before the election. And in fact, he is not only going to do that, he's going to do that tomorrow. And he has requested permission from Judge Chutkan to exceed the page limit so he could submit. He says he has 180 pages. So I believe that almost all of this has never been seen before. We don't know what it is. And since it deals with immunity, what I am most looking forward to is Mark Meadows, because Mark Meadows is cooperating by all reports. He's given a proffer. He's talked to Jack Smith, and Mark Meadows.
Jack Smith.
Mark Meadows knows everything.
He's the linchpin, isn't he?
Man, he's the linchpin.
Yeah.
He was the man between Trump. He's the hub of the wheel. He's the man between Trump and all the kaleidoscope of characters, whether it's John Eastman or Sidney Powell or Michael Flynn. It all went through Mark Meadows. And Mark Meadows was the only one who had direct communication with Trump as the January 6th riot was happening. So he knows everything about what Trump was saying and doing. What my hope is, my wish is that in amongst all of this treasure trove of evidence that we are going to see unveiled tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of Mark Meadows stuff in there, and it is going to be absolutely explode. I think this could be a nuclear bomb in this election being dropped tomorrow, and not many people are talking about it.
Mark Meadows isn't just the linchpin. His cell phone is the linchpin. Right.
Yep.
We shouldn't forget that this is a guy who, a whole lot of that administration, they operated through text message. Mm-hmm. Right. And so there's undoubtedly a trail of messaging. And I do believe, am I right in saying that his cell phone was subpoenaed, and it is now, it does form part of the evidence. So, I mean, it's not like
One thing we know for sure is all of the members of Congress were texting him like crazy.
That's right.
Leading up to that and after. Trying to get pardons and stuff. So yes, I mean, we could have Jim Jordan stuff on there. We could have many members of Congress, I think, are very nervous about tomorrow's filing. And no one except Jack Smith and his staff has any idea what's going to be in it. We know that the Trump people had tried very hard to block this from happening, saying that this was election interference and that this should be heard after the election. They did not want this because they know how bad this potentially could be. And I think Jack Smith also knows he's not going to get a trial before the election because of the Supreme Court. And I think this is how he's going to get to the public. The only way he's going to get to the public all of the most damaging evidence against Trump. It's going to be tomorrow. And I hope and pray it is, because I know that what he knows is much worse than has been reported so far.
I mean, look, Donald Trump should not be on the ballot. And I'm not saying that from a partisan perspective. I'm saying that from a common sense, rule of law, civility perspective. A guy who attempts to overturn the election, manages a coup, successful for a few hours, delayed the certification in Congress, steals classified documents, shares them with people, lies about giving them back. How is it even possible that this nutcase can be allowed to be on the ballot? That's rhetorical, by the way. You don't have to answer that.
Well, legally, the answer is pretty short. It's Mitch McConnell. I mean, it's just that simple. They almost had enough votes to convict him in the Senate. They needed 2/3.
Yes.
And if McConnell had come out and told his people, look, I'm gonna vote to convict Trump, that would have been the end of it. He would have been convicted, and he couldn't run. But he didn't. At the very last minute, he chickened out, and that's why we're here.
But it's going to end up costing the GOP. The fact that they've put all their eggs in the Donald Trump basket, into the basket of a felon, a rapist, somebody who is, a lifetime criminal. There's no way that this is going to come good for them. That they've done a deal with the devil, Ron.
I think it's going to cost them the House for sure. Part of the problem, part of the reason why the House has been unable to get anything done has because of Donald Trump's meddling, because of Donald Trump constantly putting his fingers involved, putting his thumb on the scale, also endorsing some of the worst possible candidates for general election time. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to cost him badly in the House, possibly even a few Senate seats. I think that probably the Republicans are going to take the Senate 51-49 now. I've since made my mind up about that a few days ago, as things are looking bad in Montana for John Tester. But I think that they are going to lose the White House, and the Democrats are going to retain it, and they're going to lose the House of Representatives, and they're going to have a 51-49 majority. But in the Senate, but keep in mind, there's a few soft Republicans in there that will go the other way and vote with the Democrats.
I still can't believe that Donald Trump is polling 50-50 pretty much. And as you've just described, in order to gain power, you have to play the Electoral College system. You have to play the game. And the fact that the House can be split so evenly, despite what's happening in the real world, because, of course, you poll the nation, people do not, people are pro-choice, they're not anti-abortion. The difference between the representation of Americans and the views of Americans are completely different.
Yeah. I mean, Trump and the Republicans are running on two things. It's very simple. Migrants, the number of migrants, and prices, grocery store prices, inflation. That's it. I mean, that's basically there's two issues that they're running on. They're not running on any foreign policy. They're not running on much of anything else. And so the only question is, are those two issues enough to resonate with enough people? I mean, they certainly seem to be mobilizing the Republican base, but how much more they get outside of that base, that's really the big question right here.
But don't they always run on immigration and the economy? I mean, that's
the
basically
economy,
it,
yes,
isn't it?
I mean, we haven't really had inflation this bad because of the pandemic since 1980 was the last time inflation.
And they always leave the pandemic out of their analysis of inflation.
Of course. And that's the whole reason why there was inflation.
But not just in America. This is it. I don't hear
all over the world.
People enough saying that this is a worldwide issue that the rest of the planet is also having to deal with. Now, it's interesting that you were saying about Jack Smith and this filing, because you also said that's if people actually get to hear about it, and people haven't heard much about it yet, and no one's really talking about it. I want to play this sane washing clip that we have from CNN, because this is an example of how media that is controlled by certain, political classes are preventing true journalism, fact-based journalism from happening. And maybe you can just set this up before I play this clip.
Yeah, I will, because I will set it up because I watched the speech. You know, I watched Trump's speech, and I was talking to Brett, Nason, and a couple of the other guys with Midas, and we were all watching it, and we were just like, this guy is just totally unhinged. This is one of his craziest speeches.
Yeah.
It was one gap. It was supposed to be on economics. It was only supposed to be talking about his economic plan. And he did what he usually does. He veers off and onto a million different tangents on a lot of different subjects, occasionally wandering back to his script on economics on his teleprompter. But most of it was unhinged, you know, talking about Kamala Harris working at McDonald's and, you know, one gaffe after another, mispronouncing words. It was the usual gobbledygook. And I'm like, this speech was absolutely horrifying. It was not even serious. And then, boom, they go to CNN and they bring their commentator up to report on the speech, and this is the clip. This is CNN's. So if you didn't watch the speech, and most people don't watch Trump speeches, and you only watched CNN's version recap of it, this is what you would think happened.
Here it is.
Yeah, we don't really have an answer on how exactly he's doing the math, but I do want to talk a little bit about his focus on the economy. As you heard there, David laying out those numbers, a pretty stark difference between voters who believe Donald Trump could do a better job on the economy moving forward than Kamala Harris. His campaign is hoping to seize on that and hoping Donald Trump will stay on message talking about the economy. Now, this speech has been about 50-50. He talked about the debate. He relitigated what happened with Vice President Kamala Harris, and he just went through the details of both the first and second assassination attempt. But when he has talked about the economy, the message here is clear. He wants to bring back American jobs if he is reelected. And he's also saying that if he's reelected, he wants to, quote, take jobs from foreign countries. Take a listen.
Who is Kristen Holmes? And how does
I
she
don't
still have a
know.
job?
I mean, there was nothing about the gaffes. There was nothing about the insanity. There was nothing about his crazy statements about Ukraine and McDonald's. I mean, you know, they treat him like a serious candidate making serious policy statements. I mean, he's busy talking about a 60% tariff on everything coming from China, a 20% tariff on the whole world, all goods coming from around the world.
Well, he's mentioned 200% tariffs as well. I mean, but surely it's her job to say that tariffs do not work. And there is no evidence to say that any of his previous tariffs worked. They end up costing the American consumer or the American retailer or the American wholesaler. They do not benefit America's coffers.
Her only comment about that was at the beginning where she said, well, he was a little unclear about the numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, he's at the same time, he's promising no taxes on tips and gratuities, no taxes on Social Security, no taxes on overtime, basically proposing like no one's going to pay taxes. Only the rest of the world's going to, it's sort of like Mexico building our wall, right? The rest of the world is going to pay all our taxes for us, and we're going to pay nothing with Donald Trump. And that's her recap of that speech.
And how's that wall looking, Mexico?
Mexico didn't pay a penny.
Sane washing is a new word in our kind of journalistic vernacular, isn't it? And it's actually very interesting because it for the first time, it actually deals with Donald Trump's mental illness. You know, he is insane. And to report on him, in fact, it was the Australian Guardian that actually started this about 5 or 6 years ago. One of their correspondents went to a rally and they were like, hang on a second, what I'm reading in the press and what I just saw are two completely different things.
I feel the same way
and
all the time.
It's journalists and reporters, because of their journalistic training, they presume that you have to cover an event in a traditional fashion. They make no exception for authoritarianism, for insanity, for despotism, for abuse, the language of violence and abuse and hate speech. They just clean him up. They make him sound sane. They make it fit the pagination and the way these things are laid out. It is a great failing of our journalism.
CNN in 2020 would be Jim Acosta would have been doing that report.
Right.
And it would have sounded something like this. Well, this was supposed to be a serious economic speech that focused. However, he ended up talking about Hannibal Lecter, you know, him winning the debate against Kamala Harris, her working at McDonald's, the fact that she's not black, and spent a little bit of time talking about how tariffs would that Americans would pay no taxes because tariffs will, that's kind of how Acosta would have presented it. But this is the new CNN. That's the old CNN, and they don't do that kind of stuff anymore.
Let's talk about McDonald's for a moment, because Donald Trump has also seized upon this announcement, or this historical storyline of Kamala Harris about her having was it like a summer job in McDonald's, and her husband did too. So I mean, that's kind of something cute that they have in common. And so many people have had jobs in fast food restaurants, people that are regular people who need to do casual work. Donald Trump would know nothing of this, of course. Well, he's turned it on its head, and now he's trying to kind of steal that story for himself. Here it is.
Remember this. For a long time, she's been talking about her experience at McDonald's. I worked at McDonald's over the French fries. It was so hot. I think I'm going to go to a McDonald's next week someplace. I'm going to go. Might not be in your place. I'm going to go to a McDonald's, and I'm going to work the French fry job for about a half an hour. I want to see how it is. But she said she worked and she grew up in terrible conditions. She worked at McDonald's. It was such. She never worked there. And these fake news reporters will never report it. They don't want to report it because they're fake. They're fake. They don't want to report it. She never worked at McDonald's, but it was a big part of her resume. They went to the different places. Did she work here? Did she work here? Did she work here? She said, we don't know who the hell she is. Leave us alone. We're making hamburgers.
I mean, all of that is a lie. All of it. Everything. Like, he hijacks the narrative.
All part of it.
Right?
Yeah, we talked about that last week, how we'll take like one little nugget of things and just weave it wrap it in a web of lies.
It's the weave, Ron. It's the weave.
It's the Trump weave, just like his hair. And, this all stems from like one little person, one right winger. I forget if it was Charlie Kirk or Jack Posobiec or one of the usual suspects, Laura Loomer, came up with this, which is the fact that Kamala Harris, and by the way, she doesn't talk about this all the time. This was like something she mentioned one time in an interview that, look, I've had, growing up, I had a lot of working class jobs. I worked,
and she talks about growing up in a middle class family. Right. She's never pretended she was poor. Her parents were both academics.
Correct. And she never said she was poor, right? That she had to do it to her, put food on the table. No, she did it like most people as a summer job for extra money when she was in high school, 15, 16 years old. She probably had a lot of these jobs, but you have Trump mocking this because Trump, who grew up with an incredibly wealthy slumlord father, who never worked a job in his life, is mocking her story because he knows that that's not anything like his story. And where does this conspiracy all come from? It comes from the fact that what she said, she worked at McDonald's. So they went back and looked at like her resume when she, worked as like a prosecutor. And she didn't put her summer job when she was 15 at McDonald's on her resume.
Surprise. Yeah.
I never put my summer jobs, my jobs when I was 15, 16 as like a paper boy and working at restaurants and things like that on my resume when I was a lawyer. I mean, who does that? Nobody does that.
I never
put
down
using that as their proof that she never worked at McDonald's.
It's like the time that I dressed up as Giggle Wiggle, the 7-foot caterpillar, to open a home care store in England. And I didn't put that on my resume either. But, sometimes we just have to do things.
It's not true.
No, it's completely true. There are photographs.
And I mean, what he says there about people going to McDonald's, what did they send some right-wing, Trump campaign person into the local McDonald's in San Francisco and say,
have you heard of Kamala Harris?
Worked here 40 years ago?
But also, what I was going to say is that he is not going to go to McDonald's himself. He's saying that he is. I mean, maybe he will.
Of course not.
But the point is that again, this whole, maybe I'll go to a McDonald's. And then he goes, I might not go to your McDonald's, meaning there's one in Pennsylvania, because he'll be long gone by then. Just the way his mind works, it's so weird and insane.
The thing is, like, he goes to McDonald's all the time on these rallies, not only for his food. That's why this thing, I think he can't let it go, because like McDonald's is personal to him.
It's
That's
his favorite food.
restaurant,
Yeah.
right? Been his favorite restaurant his whole life. So the fact that she said she works there is what's really, really bothering him. If she had said Burger King, I think he wouldn't have not even cared. But the fact that it's McDonald's is what's sticking in his craw.
Maybe
and the reason why he said it won't be here, he's in this little town, Indiana, Pennsylvania, is because, you know, he doesn't want them to actually dare him to do it. Okay, let's go and see you work a fryer. Like, he has no intention of doing that. So he just says, well, I'll do it later. In 2 weeks, he's gonna go, he'll work the fryer at a McDonald's when he comes up with a healthcare plan.
I was also thinking that maybe he's frightened that he's eaten a burger that Kamala Harris may have made in the past.
You remember the old Jesse Jackson? Do you remember what Jesse Jackson, when Jesse Jackson back in the 80s said, when I used to work at McDonald's, when there was like a really nasty old white dude would come in and racist, he said, I would spit in their hamburger before I would wrap it.
You see,
so Trump maybe has that
There's
in the back
history.
of his mind.
There's history because, you know, he is she black? Is she Indian? She used to be Indian and now all of a sudden she's black. I mean, the whole thing, you could tie it together. I mean, I'm no conspiracy theorist, but he is a racist through and through. And, you know, this is why he probably doesn't want to go backstage at the McDonald's, because he'll find out that people of color have been making his burgers for years.
But, you know, that's right. And you know what? When he talked about the fake news media won't report this, he's right. The fake news media won't report how insane Donald Trump is to bring up this McDonald's conspiracy. They don't talk about it. The only people who talk about how insane he is over this is us.
Yeah. You know, my favorite Donald Trump McDonald's quote, and I'm doing it from memory, so I hope I'm accurate. People can look it up. I think in an interview when he was asked about why he eats McDonald's all the time, he said, well, at least you know where it's come from.
Yeah. He did say that.
Right.
It's consistent. Like, exactly. Like,
yeah,
it's the same every time. Right.
But also, like, there's no risk of contamination because, you know, he's a germaphobe, right?
It's safe. It's
safe.
Right. Like, they've never really had food poisoning incidents at McDonald's because they have strict, basically it's because they nuke the shit and use so much chemicals in their food and stuff that, you know, there's no chance for any bacteria to survive.
I don't think the late, great Morgan Spurlock would agree with him, but there we are. Should probably talk about him instead of Hannibal Lecter in his rallies. Okay, let's go back to the Pennsylvania rally, because tariffs is obviously one of his favorite words. It's not just one of his favorite words. It's a beautiful word. It's a word that no one's ever really heard of before he started saying it.
I've never heard of it.
Right? It's one of the most beautiful words that he's ever heard. In fact, it's music to his ears, Ron. Now, people might think that we are making up these phrases, but he actually said this stuff. Here he is.
And by the way, you know, for years they knocked the word tariff, properly used, is a beautiful word. One of the most beautiful words I've ever heard. It's music to my ears. A lot of bad people didn't like that word, but now they're finding out I was right. And we will take in hundreds of billions of dollars into our treasury and use that money to benefit the American citizens. And it will not cause inflation, by the way.
A lot of bad people didn't like that word, Ron. But now they're laughing on the other sides of their faces.
Trump does not understand how the economy works. Just because he flips buildings in New York City and gets, you know, shady banks to loan him a lot of money based on false representations does not mean he understands how the global economy works. So what he's talking about, of course, is slapping a 20% tariff on worldwide goods, a 60% tariff on stuff out of China, and even 200% tariffs on selected things. And so what will that do? That will cause a global economic crash and global inflation, because those countries will retaliate against us, of course. And what tariffs are is very simple. They're a sales tax. The Kamala Harris campaign is 100% correct. They are a sales tax on foreign goods. And let's face it, like things you buy in America, there's almost nothing you buy that does not include something that comes from a foreign country. You know, you hear, oh, Apple iPhones are made in the US. I think the last time I saw, there's like parts in an Apple iPhone from 70 different countries.
Yeah.
That's the same thing with Tesla. It's the same thing with cars. Everything we buy, almost everything we buy, in some ways comes from a foreign country. So you're going to slap a tariff, which is a tax on virtually every product. It's essentially a national sales tax on anything not made in the United States. And then those countries are going to retaliate against our companies who export. Those are going to lose business, have to lay off workers. It would be an absolute catastrophe for the U.S. economy. And it's also, by the way, something he has pledged to do without Congress, that he will do by executive order.
Says he doesn't need Congress. I don't need Congress for this. I can just do it. Again, the authoritarian deciding that he's going to crash the economy because it's on his terms. And, you know, my fear, and in fact, we've been discussing this with Dr. Bandy Lee on the weekend show, the psychiatrist, is that he would take this same attitude of, well, I'm going to do it my way and I don't care what all the experts say, because, of course, all the economists have completely rubbished this scheme, is that he could do the same thing with nuclear weapons and a future nuclear war. Just because other people think he won't, he's just going to do it anyway. That's how mentally ill he is.
And let me tell you what else he'll do. What he'll do is the same thing he did during COVID. He'll say, okay, well, or same thing we did with the aluminum industry, but when he was president, he's going to cherry pick exceptions, waivers.
Yeah.
He's going to say, okay, company in Denmark, you want the 20% tariff waived. What are you going to do for me? You know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do that's going to benefit me? You need to praise me. You need to kiss the ring. You need to let me build a Trump hotel in your country. You know, this is what he's going to dole out waivers to these tariffs to people who are nice to him, just like he did with the protective equipment during COVID.
Because he blackmails for a living.
That's what he does. Yeah.
It's sometimes emotional. Sometimes it's public. It's like having compromat. The way that he endorses certain candidates. We saw this in the midterms. He only endorsed the candidates that said nice things about him. The fact that candidates were crap didn't bother him. And that's why so many of these candidates did not win in their districts, even though they had Trump's endorsement. And that's for me, it's the nuclear word. It's the nuclear word that no one's saying, is that he is as petty about things that are really trivial as he might be about getting into not just a trade war, but actually a physical war with an opposing country.
Yeah, exactly right.
Or even a friendly country, Ron.
That's right. Even our allies, as we saw. I mean, the way he treated Angela Merkel. I mean, the way he's treated Zelensky.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
the Queen of England.
The Queen, absolutely.
I mean, you know,
who he professed to revere. I mean, he's supposedly one of his favorite people in the whole world.
Yeah. Meanwhile, he walked in front of her, tapped her on the back. Yeah. Okay, I've got a quick clip talking about blackmail. Here's a clip, it's a very short clip, of Donald Trump literally paying people to vote for him while he was out on a walkabout. Let's take a look.
Here, it's going to go down a little bit. It just went down $100. We'll do that for you from the White House, all right? All right, bye. Nice to...
Please explain what's going on here. It's frying my brain.
I mean, his campaign people put that out to try and show, see, that it's the different way of looking at Trump and the world through the MAGA lens and through our lens, because they put that out to try and show, he's the big man. He's such a generous man. He gave this mother of three, this is what they said, gave this mother of three money to buy groceries. No, he didn't. The way I look at that is this is a man who is going in there, first time in a grocery store probably in his life, walks up to the checkout counter in front of his campaign people filming him, starts throwing around cash. And not only that, he didn't go up to the register and say, hey, look, I'm going to pay for her groceries. He takes $100 bill and throws it at her like he's throwing it at a stripper, is what he's doing. Yeah, here, have $100. There you go. Have a good time. This is not someone who's caring and compassionate about people. This is someone who uses people as props in his reality show and as people to be used so he can exploit them. The same thing he does by going to people's funerals. This is the same kind of deal. And of course, what a lot of people also focused in on, and this is probably illegal, It's a crime for a candidate to give money to prospective voters. And he's doing this in a swing state in Pennsylvania. He's handing out money to people who he's trying to get them to vote for him, which is a crime. Now, you might say, well, that's petty. It's $100. He's not trying to bribe them to vote. Well, what is he doing then? In giving her this money, he's saying to her, hey, vote for me and tell your friends, here's $100. That's illegal.
The rules do not apply to Donald Trump, it seems. And this is a
mainstream
theme.
media did not report that, by the way.
But this is a theme.
And wait a minute. Hold on. One more thing. I'm sorry to cut you off.
It's all right.
Mainstream media did not report that. But in 24 hours, that clip got 26 million views on Twitter. So mainstream media doesn't think an incident like that is worth reporting, but 26 million people sure paid attention.
His violations while in office of the Hatch Act, and that's just the very beginning, not to mention having his Trump hotel in D.C. and having foreign influencers currying favor, booking rooms. I mean, all that stuff was illegal, and none of it has been picked up upon. It's all just, oh, that's Trump. You know what Trump's like. You know what he's like. It's fine. Well, if Joe Biden did that, or if Obama or Kamala Harris, anybody.
Can you imagine Kamala Harris throwing around $100 bills in a grocery store to voters, saying, "Oh, I'll pay for your groceries for you"? Can you imagine? I mean, that would be everywhere. And yet media doesn't even report it. But the 26 million views in 24 hours on social media shows that the American public thinks it was a big deal.
I want to show the clip again, but I want people to pay particular attention to the fact that he didn't, as you say, didn't go up to the woman and say, hi, look, I really, I've been thinking about you. I've been thinking about this town. I really want you to have this just to help with the groceries, like actually connect with her. The throwing of money has so many connotations.
That's right.
The rich and the poor. He wouldn't get near her. Yeah. The great unwashed here. It was the same as Puerto Rico throwing the toilet roll.
The same thing.
Same thing. I'm going to play the clip again.
Anthony.
And we'll watch it with that in mind.
Take the rest of it. Here, it's going to go down a little bit. It just went down $100. We'll do that for you from the White House, all right? All right, bye. Nice.
Shit, Ron, I just saw something else in that clip.
What was that?
He handed it to her, but he purposely let go before she took it.
Oh, yeah.
This is to embarrass her. This is a power play.
Pick it up. Pick it up.
Pick it up.
It's what men do to strippers and strip clubs. Here, bend over and pick it up.
If it was a guy, he would have put his arm around him, given him the money in his hand, patted him on the back, and made a kind of male-male connection. But because this was a female doing her grocery shopping in an environment that he has no understanding of, remember, he thinks you need to show ID to buy groceries. The fact that he threw the money at her, it's, people, but especially women, will not respond well to that clip.
It's gross. And yet, the misogynist in the Trump campaign put that out. They put that out and thought, oh, this shows what a man of the people he is.
They're screwed then.
That's how they captured it.
If they think that is going to get them votes, then they are screwed. Listen, we have to take a quick break, but we have a couple more examples of the exploitation of humans for Donald Trump's gain. We'll do that next here on Uncovered. If, like me, you've got culinary taste but won't entertain restaurant prices, Cook Unity is the first chef-to-use service delivering locally sourced meals from award-winning chefs right to your door every week. And it's cheaper than other delivery options. Go to cookunity.com/uncovered or enter code UNCOVERED before checkout for 50% off your first week. Cook Unity is a great way to support local chefs and suppliers. Every meal is handcrafted by chefs and made in local micro kitchens, not large production facilities. Your food arrives fresh, never frozen, in packaging that keeps meals fresh in the fridge for up to 7 days. You can pick as few as 4 or as many as 16 meals per week. There are hundreds of dishes to choose from, and the menu is updated constantly. There's options for 7 different dietary preferences. Menus are posted 2 weeks in advance, so you have plenty of time to choose. Experience chef-quality meals every week delivered right to your door. Go to cookunity.com/uncovered or enter code UNCOVERED before checkout for 50% off your first week. That's 50% off your first week by using code UNCOVERED or going to cookunity.com/uncovered. And you can find links to our sponsors in the description below. So this whole exploitation of the public is a bit of a theme with him. And I think you know which clip I'm going to play next. This is with a child at the rally where he gets, I mean, this is a short clip and it's cut off and we don't really know what happens. Maybe you can tell us what he did with this kid after the camera finishes recording.
It's his grandson. It's Laura Trump's son.
Right.
So she decides to, I think it's a daughter. I think it's a girl.
Right.
One of his grandchildren. I think it's a girl because her name is Carolina. And this was a rally in North Carolina. So naturally they got to make her a prop. Laura from Carolina. So I thought what struck me about this was when he brought her up on stage from the TV camera angle, I just thought, oh, this is gross. You know, like he never spends any time with his grandkids. He doesn't even know their names. But Laura, you know, drags them to this rally and throws them up in front of all these strange. I mean, it has to be, think about it. This kid is like, what, 3 years old, 4 years old. It's got to be a terrifying experience to be brought up there like that and held up for everybody. And they have her rehearse saying, vote for my grandpa. That's what they had her say in the microphone. And then he hands her back to Laura. But you know, what struck me in watching this was no kid wants to do this. No 4 or 5 year old little girl wants to be thrust up on stage in front of all these people. And I watched how Laura, you could see Laura kind of push her up the stairs, like she's reluctant to, she doesn't want to go up onto the stage. And Laura pushes her up the stairs. And then you see Trump, he wants to give her the big hug in front of the whole crowd. So he puts his arms out and she does not respond in any way to him wanting a hug.
Are we surprised? Let's take a look.
Oh, it is the boy. Yeah, it's the boy.
It's the boy. All right. It's very short. I'll run it again.
The girl was...
Yeah. Reluctant really is the word, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, what kid wants to be in that position? Like, what is Trump trying to say there with that messaging right there? He knows that he's perceived as like this old, out of touch guy who has nothing to do with his kids or his grandkids. Melania will have nothing to do with him. He can't get her to show up for anything. So they get this idea of, oh, we need to make him look like the kindly old grandfather who loves doting on his grandkids, right? So this is how they do it. You know, push the kid up on the stage, hold him up there, have him say vote for grandpa, and put him down. And their messaging, all their clips and stuff from the campaign is like, he loves his grandfather. Look how much he loves the grandkids. You know, there's nothing natural about this. It's all orchestrated and scripted. I watch all these moments at Mar-a-Lago and stuff. None of these things are natural when he's around his grandkids. It's all forced and it's all for the cameras.
Melania has been notable by her absence, you could put. She really is not alongside him pretty much anywhere. But she does have a book out, right? So she's having to do her own kind of tour, press tour, and it's hard for her to get press. So she ends up having to throw her own events and, you know, show up as a surprise guest at her own events. We have a clip here of this kind of where is it? Oh, it's at the log cabin at right. LGBTQ plus Republicans for Trump. Is that right? Is that what it was?
Yeah. What we know is right now she's got her book coming out, but she's got so many grifts going on right now. If you go to her website, which is melaniatrump.com, she's selling Christmas ornaments, she's selling necklaces, NFTs, you name it. She's selling all kinds of different products because here's what I think. She the only people she can sell stuff to are the Trump fans, the MAGA base. Like no just average woman who's not political is going to buy any $600 gold-plated necklace from Melania Trump. That's not going to happen. So her only audience for any of this stuff is the Trump fan base. And I think what she's trying to do is she's trying to establish some measure of financial independence from her husband, especially since she knows if he loses this election, he could be going to prison, getting hit with massive fines. There's no guarantee that the gravy train is going to continue. So she's looking to find some exit strategy, I think. So that's number one. But number two, you know, she did this log cabin event for Rick Grenell. And Rick Grenell is one of the most repulsive in Trump's orbit, his former ambassador to Germany, who everybody despised. And Rick, I think, very much wants to be Secretary of State. And he's doing everything he can to work the angles to do that. Or he wants to be maybe the number two, one of the two. And so he's also gay. He's noteworthy as being like Trump's only gay appointee, right, from the last administration. So he's running this log cabin Republican club group. So he has this event in Mar-a-Lago that he hyped big time. And he said he was going to hold this huge gay Republican event. And the keynote speaker was Melania Trump. And she was going to be instrumental in helping him convince gay people to vote for Trump. So when this thing happened, I got this clip from it, and there was like less than 50 people there. You can see Caitlyn Jenner is there, but most of the people there are not even gay. They're straight, and there's less than 50. So this is what we knew 6 months ago when this event happened, and Rick was hyping it. Now what we learned from new reporting, because of the campaign finance reports, is that the event that you're about to see where Melania showed up and read a 5-minute speech, she was paid from Trump's campaign not from Trump's campaign. She was paid from some unknown entity.
That's right. Yes,
that has not been disclosed.
Yeah.
$237,000 for this appearance.
And nobody knows where that money's come from.
Nobody
right?
knows.
And it's going to come out in the wash.
Rick won't say.
Because this could be a campaign finance violation or similar.
We have no idea where it came from. Rick Grenell, who orchestrated the event and the payment, will not say. And by the way, she made a second appearance for the log cabin people and was paid another $250,000 for that. So we know that Melania has made at least $750,000 for 3 appearances that were like 10, 15 minutes each. And one of them was at her house.
Nice work if you can get it.
Grift.
Yeah, it's relentless. All right, let's take a look at the clip. Here it is.
So first of all, thank you all for coming. This is an incredible historic event that we're having here. And obviously having the First Lady here just means so much to us. That, ladies and gentlemen, the former and next First Lady of
introduction and beautiful words. Good evening. So great to see so many familiar faces here tonight. It is an honor and a privilege to be in your presence once again, surrounded by friends and allies who share the common goal of promoting equality for all.
There's like 12 people there.
An incredible historic event, right? And then, yeah, you can see, especially if you look in the mirror behind her, you can see there's like nobody there. And not only that, I know the people that are in that room. I recognize all of them, and hardly any of them are gay is another thing. They're all members of Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
So basically, like what Rick probably did is like walk through the dining room and like rounded up a few of the old ladies that were having brunch there and dragged them in there to listen to Melania for 5 minutes. And somebody paid her $237,000. This is the Donald Trump family.
But the whole thing is a grift. It's not as if it's like, oh, she's doing this event. The event is amazing, but she got paid a lot of money. There is no event.
There's no event.
It's a non-entity. It's a non-event. and yet to be paid that much money for something reminds me of those.
It's a way for him to pay her so he can become Secretary of State.
Right. It reminds me of those kind of far-right influencers that were being paid by Russia, where they were like, oh, I didn't know the money was coming from Russia, right? And yet, apparently one time a payment was accidentally made in rubles. You know? It's like the whole thing is so clearly what it is, and yet to backtrack and deny and be like, oh, I just feel like we often talk about the stuff that goes on in the MAGA Republican world as being for show, performative, fake. It's everything from Donald Trump paying people to be at his rallies and picking and choosing the people that stand behind him, including the 3 black people, to all of these appearances in Chick-fil-A or in McDonald's or anywhere. The whole thing is not based on truth. And that is why my view is that the polling for this election is so skewed. The fact that, none of us can make sense of the fact that Donald Trump can be such a terrible candidate, such a dangerous threat to democracy, and is polling 50-50 approximately. It doesn't make sense. And the reason that it is the way it is because his whole campaign is a farce. But the polling is reporting on the farce. When it comes to it, Ron, this is just a prediction, but when it comes to it, I honestly believe that Kamala Harris is streets ahead and the Democrats are streets ahead. But we've been because we've all been brainwashed by this Trump contagion. We are living in a parallel universe where Trump is popular. He is not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if this was a popular vote, he would have no chance. But
and this is the problem. We always come back up against this.
We have the peculiar system where somebody who wins 46% can win. So that's the problem. But one more postscript on this, which is somewhat amusing, which is, in 2022, Trump started a PAC to raise money to help Republican candidates, right, running for governor and Senate and House around the country. And all these Republican donors sent him money with the idea, and what he said was he's going to use that money strategically to help candidates who really need it.
Yeah.
So he raised about over $100 million. And we know that he spent about 5. He spent about 5 of that 120. Well, where'd the rest of the money go? Well, a lot of it went to his legal fees, but a lot of it also went to Melania Trump's hairdresser, as we learned from the campaign.
That's right. Yes, I remember.
The campaign finance report said Hervé Pierre Breart. One was for 200. One was 230 something thousand. Another was like 103,000, and it said strategic consulting. And somebody's like, wait a minute, that's Melania's hairdresser.
But that's not how much a haircut costs. In the same way that speech was not worth $237,000. He
got paid like over $300,000 in like an 18-month period of time out of campaign donations.
We should remind people that Melania Trump is not an innocent bystander victim in this storyline. She is complicit, and she, from the get-go, has very extreme and far-right political views, and despite trying to be best, she is not the best of them.
I think that she despises Trump, but that doesn't mean that she despises him not for the right reasons.
Well, yeah.
She despises them for selfish reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much toxicity, It's so... that there are so many movies to watch. I'm thinking, when my kids are grown up and Donald Trump is long gone, this period of American political history is going to make so many films and TV shows, and it is going to turn into a period that is really kind of immortalized in film forever after. It's almost unbelievable what we're living through right now.
And I believe people are just going to be like, how in the world could anybody have supported this man? And I think you're going to have a lot of people, sort of like what happened with Germany after World War II, where it was difficult to find anyone who admitted that they liked Hitler, right? Yes. Most Germans, almost every German that I spoke to, back then, in the 70s or 80s, you'd talk to them and who were survived the war. Oh no, we hated Hitler. They all hated Hitler, right? I think it's going to be the same thing 20 years from now where everybody's going to be like, no, we didn't like Trump. I was never with
there
him.
There is a scientific example of this, and that is that once the ringleader has been removed from the equation, the brainwashed subjects, then they go back to their pre-cult state. And this is what the mental health professionals say. It is
interesting.
And that's what I'm fascinated to see. Once he is removed from the equation, whether or not these Trump fans suddenly are like, it's almost as if they've been given the antidote. And they wake up.
We have to, when you say removed from the equation, you mean voted out of office.
Yeah, voted out of office.
we have to say that now, since they take statements like that and blow them out of proportion.
Yeah, was it put Trump in the bullseye? Wasn't that the line that
we don't mean anything other than vote him out?
Didn't mean bullseye. The Democrats don't shoot people. It doesn't
I'm more
work
sensitive
like that.
now when I hear those things. Yeah. And I
Um,
correct myself all the time. I'm constantly like typing up a tweet and go, oh, I can't use that word. I can't use take him out, or
Ron, you're so woke. What has happened to you? Come on.
Well, you gotta watch your language.
Quite right. Talking of which, Roseanne Barr made an appearance at the Tucker Carlson tour. He's been on this, tour of the Disinformation tour, starring Tucker Carlson. And we know that Roseanne Barr has been radicalized herself in some way. Do you just want to set this up before I play the clip?
Yeah, well, Tucker started this tour like 2 weeks ago, and he just tried to do one in Australia, and it was like a bomb. There was hardly lots of tickets unsold. So, he's trying to do the same thing, but you'll notice he's trying to do it to help Trump because he's doing it in swing states. So this is supposed to be like his effort out there to help Trump. So he just did Arizona, and now he's the one you're about to see is Pennsylvania. And Roseanne Barr is like one of the opening acts. Like, how like they'll bring in like a comic to warm up the crowd. So of course he has Roseanne Barr, and she's just not funny anymore is the problem. She's just a drunk who screams racist, crazy stuff.
And she's furious as well. She's furious.
Yeah, and she's angry. She's not funny anymore. I mean, she used to be very funny back in the 80s, but that's a long time ago. And, she's not funny anymore. But, two things struck me with this clip is one is how deranged she is as like Tucker sitting there chuckling. And two, when they pan the arena, there's nobody there. There's like they rented out this huge arena thinking that they were going to sell like 30,000 tickets. And, there might be a few hundred people there.
Interesting. Let's take a look. And I'll just pre-warn you that this might be a little distressing.
They overthrew the government of our country, and they haven't even answered for it. And that pissed me off.
Yeah. So they overthrew the government. Is what she's saying.
They stole the election.
Yeah. So they overthrew the government. Okay. Yeah. So that makes a whole lot of sense.
Stealing the election. Yeah.
Yeah. Seeing as January 6th perpetrators who were trying to overthrow the result of the election were all Trump supporters. It's amazing how they can rewrite history, isn't it?
Yeah. The deep state overthrew the. Yeah. So I thought, just that whole, it was posted by one of Tucker's fans, on Instagram. And I was just struck by it just in terms of like how deranged she was, number one. But number two, there's just like nobody in that arena. You don't rent out a huge arena because that costs a lot of money to rent out a place like that. You don't rent out an arena like that unless you're confident you're going to fill it. And they literally had like, there must have been like 300 people in an arena that probably held 30,000.
There are some serious issues regarding election, the voting, because of course voting has already started, early voting has already started, absentee voting started in some places. And so Donald Trump is already ramping up the rhetoric about election fraud as he did the last time. His argument is basically, if I lose, there's fraud. If I win, there wasn't fraud. So, make of that what you will. But we've seen issues in Georgia already with this election council requesting the hand count, which is a big problem. And even Brad Raffensperger has said that this is not good for democracy because counting 5.5 million votes by hand is actually a lot less safe than having these machines count it. So there's that, but there's a whole other bunch of things. Tell us about Nebraska, because there's this last-minute Trump campaign effort to have Nebraska change how it allocates its electoral college votes. It's failed, right? But this is a kind of, it's a key GOP Senate issue, isn't it?
Yeah. Nebraska, there's 2 states that break up their electoral votes. They're not winner take all, some states, basically 50 plus 1, if you get 50% of the vote plus 1 or the majority of the vote, then you get all of that state's electoral votes, 1 electoral vote for each congressional seat that state has. That's how the Electoral College works. However, there's 2 states that choose not to do it that way, Maine and Nebraska. They split it up. They have, Maine has 2, I think Nebraska has 4. And basically they do it by congressional district. So if you just win the majority of votes in 1 congressional district, then instead of getting all 4, the other person gets 3 and you get 1. So you can at least get that 1 vote. And the same thing in Maine, in Nebraska, Omaha has generally been a Democratic district. So Democrats know they can at least pick up 1 electoral vote in North Carolina, even while losing the state. And that vote can sometimes be very, very critical. Same thing in Maine. Southern Maine is heavily Democrat. It's going to go Democrat every time. The state of Maine is a Democratic state. We have a Democratic governor. I live in Maine. But Northern Maine is like 52-48 Republican. It's very close. So that's also the issue is what Trump decided to do at the very last minute is say, let's get North Carolina. See, you can't change Maine because it's controlled by Democrats, but Nebraska is controlled by Republicans. They have unicameral legislatures. They have one legislature, and they have the governorship. And so he thought at the last minute we'll have the governor call a special session to change their rules and to make it winner take all in Nebraska, because the election could possibly come down to that 1 electoral college vote. Here's the problem for Trump. Problem for Trump is the governor of Nebraska, he endorsed his opponent in 2022, Charles Herbster. And it was a nasty personal race where Trump basically called, Pillen, who's the governor now, a rhino and all this, and not real MAGA. So Pillen beat Trump's pick. And so I think that this is Pillen's revenge, really, his refusal to call the special session. And, he uses as justification the fact that one of the key Republicans said that he would not vote for it. And so they didn't think they would have the votes. But that was the excuse. But really, I think Pillen wanted to use this occasion to pay back Trump for endorsing his opponent in the primary. So Trump trying to put his thumb on the scale in primaries, which normally party leaders do not do, came back to bite him in this particular case.
And this is all election interference, you could argue, right?
It is.
So
because they also knew it was too late for Maine, because Maine law is different. It was too late for Maine to respond. In other words, if Nebraska did it, Maine could have responded and done the same thing, but it was too late for Maine to do it. So it was really slick where they waited until it was too late for Maine, but still barely not too late for Nebraska to try and pull this move.
It's so sad to me that despite the views of the American public at large, the Electoral College system is there to be rigged.
It's a crazy system, man.
And we should remind people why the Electoral College system came about in the first place, right?
So it all goes back to slavery, right? Exactly right.
And
because, the slave states back then didn't have that many white people.
Yeah.
But they had a lot of slaves.
Yeah.
And they wanted those slaves to basically, give them some electoral punch for the presidency. And they did. That's why a lot of our first presidents were from Virginia.
And that's, I guess, and I presume, and you can correct me, but that thinking kind of then led into the gerrymandering, the redrawing of districts and boundaries to prevent black people from voting.
Yep, that's right. And to draw more congressional districts in southern states is what they're trying to do now, as well. And gerrymandering the districts as well. So you could in Nebraska, you theoretically, and Maine, you could try and gerrymander those districts since they're split up. So, yeah, it's a terrible system. It really is, and it basically makes, as we're seeing every election now, 42 or 43 states are totally irrelevant. They don't even matter. Like, candidates don't campaign in Washington or California or South Carolina. There's no point. Like, we already know how those states are going to go. The only time any candidate goes to those states is to raise money. That's it. But I mean, no one goes to Massachusetts to campaign. So you have literally like 70% of the country just gets completely ignored.
You know, when I talk to my European friends about the US, and they say things like, how can you live in America? And I try to explain that America is not one country. It is 50 different countries, in my view. Yeah, and the branding of the United States of America, I think it used to be more applicable than it is now. I mean, certainly Marjorie Taylor Greene would have the states split by politics. But it is interesting, isn't it, that increasingly, and abortion is a perfect example of this, with, Trump throwing it back to the states, of how each state has its own police force training, law enforcement, judiciary. The fact that there are Supreme Courts in states is in itself pretty weird. And yet, that's the system.
You think about it, if you drive cross country with a gun in your glove box,
right?
Half the states, it's perfectly legal. The other half, it's a felony. So
but that in
you
itself
got to know the laws of every state you're driving through.
But that does not make the states united. It's quite the opposite.
It's a peculiar system.
It is a peculiar
Uniquely
system.
American. Yeah, it's how the founders designed it. They had a lot of different reasons for what they did, but slavery was a big reason. Not the only one, but one of the biggest.
Yeah. And for those who are interested, there is so much written on how slavery hasn't really ended. It has changed, shifted. And you look at the number of black people that are incarcerated and the way that, black people still do not have any of the privileges of white people in America. There's so much to read in that area. And again, the way that Donald Trump talks, you wouldn't know it. But, it's all about the narrative, presenting a narrative where everything's going fine. And I feel this when I watch Fox and I see, invariably white hosts, wealthy white hosts, Jesse Waters and the like, when stories come in, they laugh them off. Ha ha, never heard of it. Oh, that doesn't, stuff, really important stuff. And, that's the saddest part of this. It's a bit like Trump throwing the cash at the woman at the register. It's just like,
it's a good segue to like people like Mark Robinson.
That's who we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, the reason why white Republicans love people like Mark Robinson, and there's plenty others, Tim Scott, among others, is because they tell them what they want to hear a black person say about race. Like, oh, these black people are always complaining and crying. There's nothing wrong. White people are good people. This is great. Everything's wonderful. I mean, if you were a black Republican and you tried to say anything different than that, you would have no chance of getting elected. You couldn't get 2% of the vote. But if you're a black Republican like Byron Donalds or Tim Scott or Mark Robinson, and you tell white people what they want to hear about race, you shoot right to the top, man. They love you.
I'm married to a black American, and so I've been re-educated or even educated. What I thought I knew about growing up black in America pales into insignificance compared to the reality. And that is why it was such a huge event when Barack Obama became president. What that represented to the white racists, it was the worst day of their lives. But to everybody else,
it represented the end of America.
The end of America, and that's why the sales of firearms went up. But seriously, they did.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I shouldn't laugh, but it's a pathetic thing. Yeah.
But that's the sad indictment of where America was at in 2008. And, in a way, the fact that now on the ticket we have a female person of color She's not running as a female. She's not running as a person of color. She's running as the vice president who's the best person for the job. But it is still symbolic and significant and essential and long overdue, in my opinion.
Yeah. There are still people, I hear them, Democrats, who still think that America will not elect a woman president, that they're not ready, that we're different. And that's really, really disheartening because, but I heard the same thing about Obama. I heard a lot of Democrats say, I just don't think he's going to win because ultimately this is a racist country. And even though he's polling well, white people are still not going to vote for him. And I think there were a lot of Black Democrats that were pleasantly surprised at the result, that he actually did better in the elections than the polls. But I think there's still, so some of that pessimism has gone away as far as will America vote for a Black president, but it's still there for a woman. Still there.
It's nuts because, women are doing a better job of running countries than men are. You only have to look around the world.
Many examples of that, haven't we?
Yeah, of course. Okay, let's get to Mark Robinson because this is a very interesting story. He's now hired a Trump-aligned lawyer to go after CNN, who reported last week that he'd left a litany of racist and disturbing comments on a pornography website before entering politics. What did he refer himself to himself as? Was it a black Nazi? I remember. Yes. This is a very interesting story. He is now doubling down on the denials. Let's take a quick look.
News media is at it again. My opponent is at it again. You all have seen the half-truths and outright lies of Josh Stein on these ads over and over again. And now a story leaked by him to CNN is appearing now. Let me reassure you, the things that you will see in that story, those are not the words of Mark Robinson. You know my words, you know my character, and you know that I have been completely transparent in this race and before. Folks, this race right now, our opponents are desperate to shift the focus here from the substantive issues and focus on what you are concerned with to salacious tabloid trash. We cannot allow that to happen. And folks, we've seen this type of stuff in the past as well. Clarence Thomas famously once said he was the victim of a high-tech lynching. Well, it looks like Mark Robinson is too, by a man who refuses to stand on stage and debate me about the real issues that face you. Instead, they want to focus on salacious tabloid lies. We're not going to let them do that. We are staying in this race. We are in it to win it. And we know that with your help, we will.
Methink the lady doth protest too much.
The last part of that was very bad news for Donald Trump. I think the Trump camp was trying it was like literally when he was giving that speech was the last day to drop out before ballots were mailed out.
Yeah.
And I think behind the scenes, the Trump campaign very much wanted Robinson out of the race because, number one, Trump endorsed him very early on, enthusiastically, had him up on stage. Always had him up on stage at his rallies in North Carolina, brought him up there.
Well, it makes him look less racist. That's why.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And, he says all the most horrible things that white Republicans want to hear. But here's how it's true. I mean, despite his denials there, is because Mark Robinson's entire campaign staff all quit immediately. They know it's true. They know this is who he is. They all quit. His campaign manager, his finance chair, everybody quit. And Donald Trump did not say a word, did not come forward and defend him. Donald Trump is trying to pretend he didn't condemn him either, because Trump's not going to admit he made a mistake. Right. So basically, Trump is just pretending that Mark Robinson has disappeared and no longer is in the witness protection program. And so Trump goes and does his rally in North Carolina yesterday or the day before. And Robinson was nowhere to be found for the first time. He was not at a Trump North Carolina rally. So it pretty much shows you. And what this has done is put North Carolina in play. I mean, North Carolina has always been a pretty close state, but I think most people thought, Trump will win by 2-3 points. But now with Trump's enthusiastic support of Robinson being hung around his neck, dragging him down like an anchor, The Harris campaign is now putting more money and resources and doing rallies in North Carolina, because if she wins North Carolina, this thing is over. It is over. Trump cannot win without North Carolina.
This scandal reminds me of the daily scandals that we experienced during the Trump administration. Because of the kind of tin pot people that he employed, the people he had around him, there was always something crazy coming out or going down. And I really think some people forget quite how a single day didn't go by without there being a significant controversy out of the Trump White House that would have sunk any normal administration. And yet somehow they managed to, as you say, pretend it never happened or announce something else to distract every single day. It was exhausting.
And that's happening now with all of his endorsed candidates.
Yeah.
You know, he endorsed all these wackos in the primaries. And of course, Democrats have all this opposition research on these people. Democrats didn't say a word about Mark Robinson in the primary. They were praying for Mark Robinson to be the nominee. This is what they wanted. The same thing when Trump backed Herschel Walker for Senate in Georgia. Democrats are like, we're not saying anything. You know,
we don't need to.
We're just hoping and praying that he actually wins. That
I'd forgotten about Herschel Walker. Can you imagine that even happened?
I mean, Dr. Oz, same thing. I mean, Democrats held their fire on this guy. And I said it too, like right after the primary. I remember tweeting from an airport, I think the Toronto airport. I'm like, now we are about to rain hell down on Mark Robinson, because I knew what we had on Mark Robinson. Apparently, like, the Republican voters in North Carolina didn't know. But you're right. It seems like every single day stuff comes out on one of these Trump endorsed candidates around the country that everybody is just shaking their heads going, why the hell did Trump back that guy?
Well, because Trump backs losers. He's a failed businessman. He is a petty thief. He is a criminal. He is not playing in the A team. He never has. And again, it's this projection, because he was on The Apprentice, that people think that he is a somebody when he is a nobody. The only person that ever thought that Trump was any good was him. And he kept telling us.
How many candidates did Joe Biden or Kamala Harris endorse in the Democratic primaries this time around? None.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't do it.
You don't need
As
to.
the party leader, you don't put your thumb on the scale. You let the voters decide. You don't try and pick and choose. But that's not how Trump operates.
That's how he does
everything.
That's how he does international diplomacy as well, Ron. That's like extorting Vladimir Zelensky and saying, get me dirt on Hunter and Joe, and in return I'll, give you the support that you need. I mean, this is who this guy is. He is transactional. And this is why he is not capable of winning an election. 2016 was an anomaly. It was a fluke. People didn't know who he was. They knew who he was in 2020, and he lost. And they certainly know who he is now.
I think about Kerry Lake. I mean, Doug Ducey wanted to run for that seat.
Yeah.
The governor of Arizona, outgoing, fairly popular governor, fairly moderate governor of Arizona, would have been 100 times better candidate against the Democrats than Kerry Lake. But Trump early on said, nope, Kerry Lake's going to be our guy. He doesn't know Arizona politics. He doesn't know what's going on the ground there. And so Doug Ducey says, well, I wanted to run for the seat, but I can't because Trump's backing Lake. So they end up with the worst possible candidate. This happens time and time again.
Let's finish with a clip of Donald Trump. He's now saying that he would like to claim credit for saving hundreds of millions of lives all over the world for approving the COVID vaccines. Now, we should set the record straight. There have been many studies that say that if Donald Trump had handled the COVID pandemic properly, that somewhere between 400 and 600,000 people would not be dead who are currently dead because of his inaction and inability to handle the pandemic. 1.2 million Americans died. during the pandemic and continue to. I mean, let's not think that it's gone away. It is still a thing. And as you know, I only got it myself a few weeks ago, and I was out for 10 days. I mean, it's very serious when you still get it. So let's take a look at this clip of him trying to, again, rewrite his legacy, because he knows that this is something that actually a lot of people have a big problem with.
Do you think that maybe they were approved too fast? And in hindsight, based on what we know now, what would you have done differently?
Well, I think they're doing studies on the vaccines, and we're going to find out, and it'll come out one way or the other. But I really had a mandate to get vaccines done, and I got them done very quickly in record time. The Democrats love it. You know, the Democrats love it, and the Republicans don't. It's very interesting. The vaccines, they love it. I have a friend of mine who said to me, why don't you talk about the vaccine, what you did with the vaccine? He's a Democrat, but I'm sure he voted for me. He said, what you did was the most incredible thing that any president has ever done. You've saved hundreds of millions of lives all over the world. And this was just recently, very smart guy. He said, I don't understand why you don't talk about it. And I don't talk about it. But if you go to Pfizer, if you go to some of these companies, they have charts and they have all sorts of statistics. And I say, why don't you release those statistics? Let people know. But I don't talk about it. I can say this, the Democrats would love to claim it. The Republicans don't want to claim it.
I don't talk about it, even though I'm talking about it now. I'm talking about how much I don't like to talk about it, because I never talk about it. But I'm just going to tell you about it whilst not talking about it.
This is, you have to really know the backstory here. Yeah, which is Trump, in his mind, views warp speed as the signature achievement of his presidency.
This is Operation Warp Speed
that he did, right? Yeah. Which is, now, of course, he did it to benefit himself. Yeah. It wasn't about saving lives. If you rewind, he was desperate for the FDA to approve for emergency use a vaccine before Election Day, because he wanted to tout, my work has I've created this miracle vaccine that's going to save everyone and reopen the economy, and this was all my doing. I pressured them to get it out, and FDA, I mean, it wasn't ready. It hadn't completed trials, and he raged about the fact that it didn't come out until after the election. And he blames that for his loss. But he badly wants to take credit for it, because it was released, I believe, in December after the election. It was approved by the FDA for emergency use. And so he wants to claim that as a signature achievement of his presidency. Here's the problem. He went out and he did his first couple rallies in early 2022, and he said what he just said in that clip to his rally crowd, and they booed him. It's like the only time the MAGA crowd has ever booed Donald Trump is when he brought up the vaccine and warp speed and how many lives he saved, right? He bragged about it and they booed him because his base thinks that the vaccine is a bioweapon created by the deep state to depopulate the world, and that none of them took it. And so he tried it again a second time at the next, maybe he thought, well, maybe that was just a bad crowd. He got booed a second time. Yeah. And that was it for Trump, because his ego can't handle that. So he completely stopped talking about it. So it bothers him so much. He chafes about this. The fact that he views this as the greatest achievement of his presidency, but what you just heard in that clip, but he can't talk about it, because if he does, his own supporters will be furious. And that is killing him, that he can't brag about this. And it shows you how dark a soul this man has.
I was thinking about the fact that he inherited a very strong economy from President Barack Obama.
He did.
And as we know, the GDP growth just continued on the same trajectory. There was no spike when Trump took over.
Correct.
And then, of course, for somebody like him who likes to take the credit for other people's work, he claimed he had the greatest economy. And then, of course, comes along a pandemic, something he doesn't really know what it is. He has no idea how to deal with it. He's ignored the dossier that was left behind. He's completely out on his own. So he kind of throws it at Mike Pence and says, you deal with it.
And Jared Kushner.
And Jared Kushner, of course, yes. The great doctor, Jared Kushner, Dr. Kushner. And so it must have, for Donald Trump, somebody who is so mentally unstable and who considers himself to be the great businessman despite the 6 bankruptcies, to have an inherited strong economy be taken away from him by a natural disaster, effectively, something that he's ill-equipped to handle, will forever haunt him.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
He'll never be able to come to terms with that, which is why he created the phrase China virus, which is why he came up with this theory about the lab leak and, the bioweapon story and jumping on the QAnon stuff with it and everything. Anything because he couldn't even roll out the testing. Do you remember? The testing rollout got ramped up, I should say, by the Biden administration. They suddenly started testing everybody.
Was the magic vaccine.
Yeah.
That was going to solve everything.
Right.
But he couldn't get the FDA to approve it fast enough.
Because it wasn't rushed. It wasn't rushed.
Ready. They hadn't had trials done.
Yeah.
It was still rushed out. Even when it was finally released, it was still rushed.
Well, only because they took out all of the bureaucracy and the delays that are normally there, but it was still tested properly.
But it didn't come out in time to benefit him.
Yeah. And the biggest frustration for everybody around the world was that the pandemic happened in an election year. And really, or just before the election year, and really all Trump cared about was getting reelected.
That's it.
And continuing his grift. And this thing was an inconvenient truth for him. And he wouldn't let it get in the way. And in fact,
in reality, if he had just handled it the right way instead of the way he thought he needed to handle it,
could have brought people together.
The American people would have been. I don't know that I would have, because that's when I left the Republican Party, was because of his handling of the pandemic. I don't know that I would have left if he'd embraced science and done things. I probably might still be a Republican today, but it was his mania and his insanity and the Republican Party's embrace of it largely that just pushed me over the edge.
All of the stuff, the hydroxychloroquine, the bleach, the shining a light maybe from inside the body, maybe you can do a cleaning that way. Deborah Birx with her head in her hands. And Dr. Anthony Fauci doing this at the back. All of it.
Yeah.
It was awful. And
it seems like Americans have forgotten it all.
Well, the family members of the 1.2 million people who died will never forget. And there are a whole lot of other people who died as a result of Donald Trump's presidency as well that we don't hear about. Or we don't necessarily remember, Asian hate crime that went up. And if you're in minority groups and, the way you were handled by the police, like so many things, not to mention George Floyd, for example,
a lot of that
Ahmaud Arbery.
Property destruction during the protest would not have happened if we had a president who could have tamped down the temperature.
Yeah. Okay, we have to finish, but it's always a pleasure to spend an hour or so with you on a Wednesday, Ron. We'll do it again next Wednesday. If you'd like to download the audio podcast at Uncovered, you can do that later on tonight. It drops wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to check out our sponsors. They're in the description below. And we'll look forward to coming back and doing it again next week. Thanks a lot, Ron.
All right, you got it.